Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning into another Super Tees video. And now we're all starting to get a little bit old. Some of you probably have families, you've got careers, and you don't have a lot of time to play World of Warcraft, and you're looking for something that's a little bit simpler, a little less dexterous, a little less strainful on the wrist. So in today's video, I'm going to be constructing a tier list for which specializations are the best for done dads in order to have fun and success in PvP without all of the other things that go along with it. And there's a lot to discuss with each specialization specifically when considering this. It's important to consider keybinds. It's important to consider like how spammy is it? How often are you frequently like just mashing buttons? And basically how complicated is it to do damage on it effectively? You know, like how many steps do you need to do? Do you need to be doing max APM, or can you kind of get away with a little bit more sloppiness and still be effective? And it's important to include current tuning and power amongst that discussion as well in order to accurately place these. So if your specialization is on S, it means it is the absolute best spec for the done dad who comes home to play for an hour and just wants to have some fun and maybe even still have a shot against some of the sweats without having to put like a huge amount of investment behind the specialization. So Affliction Warlock. Now this specialization is pretty high APM. You're going to always be spam casting. Another difficulty of it is that you're going to be interrupted. Now some of those interrupts are alleviated now that you got multiple schools of magic, so it's a little bit less painful specifically with regards to that. But other things to consider is that you have spammable crowd control to manage at all times, and you've got a ranged interrupt, which means you need to be aware of basically anyone that's casting at any time, at any distance, which requires more awareness and more energy. So for me, for Affliction, given the current power, it can get out quite a lot of damage quite effectively, especially with like Haunt Shadow Bolt combo. So for me, I think it's probably like middle of the pack. Maybe we'll put it down on C. Overall, I think that the keybind, actually, you know what? The keybinds, put it down on D, I think. It has a lot of keybinds. You need multiple curses. Yeah, I think D is actually more of a fair place for it. Arcane Mage, it's really hard to get effective damage out on this specialization. It requires a lot of precision on overlapping certain cooldowns. And so it's the way to get effective damage out is really difficult for anybody that's a done dad, doesn't have a lot of time and still feel effective. It's got a lot of keybinds. Mage in general has a lot of keybinds. You've ranged interrupt like Warlock, so you've got to have hyper awareness to everything else going on in the game. So for me, I think Arcane Mage is also coming in towards the bottom, probably something that you would want to avoid. Arms Warrior, though, on the other hand, I think is a lot simpler. Melee ranged interrupt means you don't need to have as much awareness, and also you can lower kind of the macro density as well, because you can only really pummel anything that's next to you. So like the mandatory feel of like needing like a counterspell, Arena 1, 2, 3 or something like that is brought down quite a lot from the ranged classes specifically. Damage rotation is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can get a lot of effective burst damage out for it specifically. Keybinds are not that overwhelming on Warrior. I think Warrior is probably one of the lower overall. So I think Arms Warrior, honestly, for like the done dads, I think Arms Warrior is probably going in at the top. Assassination Rogue, you know, Rogue in general is like pretty high APM, can feel pretty spammy with what you've got to do. There's a lot of like coordination and synergy that you can do with Rogue specializations, but Assassination I think is probably the easiest of all of them if you were going to want to go after a Rogue specialization, but it's still, I would say, reasonably hard in order to get like effective damage out, in order to take somebody down, and due to needing all the macros for all the abilities and stuff like that and the keybinds of Rogue, I think it's still going to be coming in more towards the bottom. Balanced Druid is pretty straightforward, honestly, in this current patch. Press Incarnation and Force of Nature and spam Star Surge. You can get a lot of effective damage out with that rotation pretty simply while keeping dots up. You know, maybe the spammable Cyclone, but at the same time, the lower cooldown interrupt means you don't need to worry about, you know, constantly interrupting things like a wind shear or a counterspell or something like that. So it's a little bit less kind of brain density as far as that is concerned. Keybinds are probably like mid, not like a huge amount. So I think for Boomkin, it's probably going to be like more middle, not too bad of one to go after, but has some nuance to it that could make it feel a little bit more complicated. I kind of want to honestly put it here, maybe on A tier with its current tuning, but we'll leave it on B for now, I think. Beast Mastery Hunter, it's really spammy. Doesn't have a lot of keybinds though, and you can get a lot of effective damage out with little effort. But if you're worried about like the arthritis stuff in your wrist and stuff like that, you might want to avoid it. But overall, I think that it is actually very friendly towards new players at the moment. A lot of your damage is just coming from your pets. Your kill shot procs are really powerful at the moment, so you just pop anything that lights up. That's obviously going to be very easy to play. I think for me, what holds it back maybe from being S tier for the done dads is just how spammy it is, because it's constantly just something that you're going to need to be pressing. Blood DK, If you're a done dad, honestly, tank specs are probably for you. So you know what? I'm putting the tank specs up here. They're not really great right now, but like you'll just never die on them. So if you want to be super annoying, you don't really know what's going on, like you can kind of just play a tank spec and be totally fine with it. Demonology Warlock has just as much maintenance as like Affliction does. In that sense, but a lot of your damage is coming from your pets, so I think it makes it a bit easier. You also have a lot more like crowd control, so you can stun people attacking you and then cast, and that feels a lot easier to do than Affliction Lock, where you're kind of exposed in that sense. So for me, I think Demonology is probably a little bit harder than Affliction, or a little bit easier than Affliction, sorry, so a little bit closer to the Dundad tier. Destruction Warlock, probably very similar. Honestly, I don't know, do I want to put Destruction on B tier? I feel like Destruction Warlock is like the easiest Warlock spec, or close to the easiest Warlock spec, at least from my personal experience playing all three of them at this point. But in general, I think having like low cooldown interrupts. Keybind density is a bit lower though than Demo and Affliction. So I don't know. We'll put it in the middle. I think Destruction can kind of get away with kind of being in the middle at the moment for the Dundads. Now, Devastation Evoker, this is probably like all-time best spec to play if you're a Dundad. Just super effective damage, really easy gameplay. You can fly around, immune to snares, the PvP talents, pop obsidian scales, be immune to interrupts, and just spam one button. You also don't need to switch targets a lot. I feel like classes that need to constantly switch targets, that's where things become more complicated. You got to manage debuffs on multiple targets, figure out what their diminishing returns are. Devastation can just kind of just fly and attack one thing while being immune to everything. It's easily the best spec to play if you're a Dundad. Discipline Priest, it's kind of mid because it's strong, but it is also at the same time not straightforward as a healer because you got to focus on doing damage. So Discipline Priest for me, as far as like ease, I'm going to put it onto C tier for now. It has a lot of crowd control avoidance and skill mechanics that you need to be aware of. If you're not, you're going to get caught and it's going to be rough. But its raw throughput is so good, though. It can kind of compensate for that. Like in Battlegrounds, it's way more friendly towards Dundads if you want to focus on Battlegrounds and try to include like the game as a whole. But I think, you know, maybe it's here. I'll put it here for now. I think its throughput is so high that I think that's fair. Elemental Shaman is really easy right now. It's really easy, but it has a lot of keybinds. So much like BM Hunter, I think the spamminess of BM Hunter, the keybinds of Shaman are kind of preventing it from going up to S. You can kind of get away with just doing your damage rotation, though. Flame Shocks and Earth Shocks and Lava Burst procs and Frost Shock procs, but the maintenance of Wind Shear, really one of the lowest cooldown range interrupts. I think it is the lowest cooldown range interrupt in the game. It's a lot of maintenance in order to get damage out, but it's decently tanky at the moment. Really easy to get like effective damage out. Most of it's instant cast. You don't really have to care about getting kicked, so it's not that stressful. Enhancement Shaman is a mixed bag because if you play the Stormbringer build, I think it actually is much like Elemental. Really easy to do the damage rotation. Same deal though with the maintenance and the keybinds. It's still very high. If you play Totemic, things get a lot more crazy as far as keybinds and like overall maintenance. So for me, I think Enhancement Shaman, depending on your build, it's going to make it easier or harder. So I'll put Enhancement kind of like in the B tier. I want to put it here though. I'm going to put it on the B tier for right now. I'm going to keep myself reserved, trying to like maintain the space, but I think it could be A tier. Feral Druid, on the other hand, you know, you've got a ranged kick, so it's already making it a bit harder. A lot of attack buttons. You have a lot of buttons. You got spammable crowd control. So for me, like, even though Feral Druid is really strong right now, I wouldn't say that it's going to be like the Dundad spec. So I'm going to put Feral Druid down here. I think the maintenance of DRs, the ranged kick, the amount of keybinds that you have, and just the amount of attack buttons that you have in cat form can be a lot. So Feral Druid down here in the D tier. Fire Mage is definitely easier than Arcane because it's all instant. You're kind of squishy in the current meta. You have decent damage overall. Managing the crowd control DRs can be difficult, but I honestly think Fire Mage, I don't know, is it the easiest? I think in terms of its tuning, it's not. So in terms of its tuning, I'm going to put it down here on C tier. If it was tuned to be a bit stronger, it's got to be the easiest mage spec. But it's tuned in a way where it's kind of squishy, hard to survive right now. So you might find some frustration, but it's definitely easier than Arcane. Whereas Frost, I think Frost is really easy right now. It gets a lot of effective instant cast damage relative to Fire. And it's a bit tankier with multiple ice blocks, and the snares give you a lot more breathing room against melee DPS. Still have the range to interrupt, so it can still be considered a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to put Frost Mage here on the B tier. It's the easiest mage spec for Dundads for sure, but we're going to have to wait and see. Now we've got Frost DK. Frost DK is actually pretty new player friendly. I don't think Death Knight has a huge amount of keybinds, but it does have the ranged interrupt. You got to be a bit more aware towards that, but it's definitely easier than Holy due to the fact that it doesn't have a pet to manage. I think pet management does make the game a bit more complicated. Constantly have to be aware of where it is and making sure it's not dead. A little bit more awareness required with that. So I think not having a pet makes it a bit easier to play. I think Frost DK gets actually a lot of damage out at the moment. I think it's actually kind of underrated after playing it more and more and playing against it more and more, and seeing it more. I think it's actually really underrated. So I think Frost DK, I'm gonna put it up under the A tier. I think it's one of the easier melee at the moment. It's actually really strong. Fury Warrior, I think the only reason I don't want to put this on S tier is because it's more spammy than Arms. I feel like Arms Warrior, you get more globals in between, kind of hard-hitting attacks. Fury Warrior, though, the advantage is that you can just train one target, which is really nice. So maybe I should put it up onto the S tier. Maybe Fury Warrior is the done dead melee DPS, is it? I think it's too spammy. I think because it's too spammy, I'm going to take it down, put it onto A tier for now. Guardian Druid, same type of deal. The tank specs are all done dead specs. Demon Hunter, not stupendously strong at the moment. I think the tuning's holding it back. It is kind of spammy as well. It's got like a moderate level of keybinds, probably like middle. I think it's a little harder than something like Fear Warrior because you have multiple crowd control DRs to keep track of at all times. You've got Fear DR, Incap DR, and Stun DR. It's a lot to kind of maintain, but its damage rotation is pretty straightforward. I think for me, I'm going to put Demon Hunter kind of in the middle. And maybe we'll move Enhancement at some point, but we'll think about it. Holy Priest, really straightforward healer as far as gameplay. Just a lot of instant cast healing. I think it's actually kind of underrated at the moment. I think it's really easy to play, really simple. One of the easiest healers, really straightforward. Doesn't have a lot of globals to maintain in terms of doing damage if you did want to do some damage. I'm going to put Holy Priest. I'm going to put Holy Priest on S tier for done deadness. Done deadness up on S tier. Holy Paladin, same deal though. I think it is also on S tier for done deadness. Just really strong, lots of immunities, big instant cast healing. Whenever you're in that, maybe we'll bring Holy, just because Holy Paladin's tuning. I think if Holy Priest was tuned a little bit different, I'd put them both up there, but based on the tuning, Holy Paladin just, it's really all instant cast, tons of immunities, tons of cooldowns to rotate through. It feels really strong as a result. Marksmanship Hunter would honestly probably be on S tier, but its tuning is holding it back a lot. I think it's weak just because of its tuning. Doesn't have the same spamminess as Beast Mastery Hunter, so we play Hunter spec and not get Arthritis, play Marksman over BM, because you got big channeled spells where you press aim shot and then your hand comes off the keyboard and you get like a little bit of time to rest without going the whole time. But I think its tuning is making it harder in the current patch. So for me, I'm gonna put it. I want to put it with A tier just because, like, I don't know. I need to consider the tuning though, so I'm gonna put it on B tier. I think because of the tuning, it makes it a bit harder. Mistweaver Monk, really simple healer. Also at the moment, you've got multiple ways to do immune kicks. Although you do have to cast more. I think just the fact that you have to cast more makes it harder than something like a Holy Paladin or a Holy Priest, because you have to deal with getting interrupted. But its rotation is really simple. So this one's a tough one. I think on almost all the healers, you don't have to worry too much about them feeling spammy if you're worried about something like that. Maybe Shaman is probably the most spammy. Mistweaver, I'm going to put it onto A tier with Holy Priest, I think, for right now. Outlaw Rogue, absolutely do not touch this if you're a done dead. You need to be taking a lot of stuff to be able to play Outlaw Rogue. This is the highest APM demanding spec in the game. Tons of different ways that you could play this specialization, and your wrists will hurt. Do not touch this if you're a done dead. Preservation Evoker, it's not really spammy, has like a moderate amount of keybinds, has good ways to go immune to effects so that you can kind of just cast without getting annoyed by crowd control and stuff like that. So for me, I think Preservation Evoker, I'm going to put it on B tier. Maybe, I don't know. It can be hard with things like Echo, and the fact that you're really close to the fight can make it difficult. This is a hard one, but you also have really strong, powerful cooldowns. Like, what healers are going to be at the C and D tier if I put Prez here? I'm going to leave Prez here for now, but we'll see here in a second. Again, all the tank specs, they're all very simple. They're all really easy. Resto Shaman, probably the one that you don't want to touch if you're a done dead. It's really struggle bus at the moment with tuning. Has the most keybinds of any healer ever in the game. And is a bit more spammy with what you constantly need to monitor. So I'd say probably avoid that if you're a done dead. Resto Druid, I think much like Marksman, it's the tuning maybe that's keeping this one back a bit, because I think it can be an easier healer to play. Maybe not. Maybe we'll put Resto Druid here. Maintaining HOTS on multiple targets, managing where your life bloom is, can make it a lot more difficult and complicated, but you have big instant healing, Tree of Life. There are things about it that do. It's honestly probably just like a good mix, so maybe I should put it in the middle. I'll put it here for now just because of the tuning. Ret Paladin, really good specialization to play if you're a done dad, which is really big crits. Straightforward, go immune to damage, smash things. Don't have to worry about DRs. I've seen Ret Paladins that forget to use half their abilities and still win, so it's probably still going to be a pretty good done dad spec. Shadow Priest, a lot of hard casting like Affliction Lock. You got some backup with the fact that you're just kind of passively tanky. I think that's important if you're a Dundad as well. It gives you more time to react to things. But I think keybinds and awareness to utility makes it definitely a lot harder. So I think for me, I'm going to put our Shadow Priest like down here, which again, like if we're talking tuning, like Shadow Priest, Feral, they're at the top. But if we're talking like kind of like Dundadness, I think they're harder to play. Subtlety Rogue, again, this one much like Outlaw, you probably want to avoid it. It has you play this one way or you don't play it at all. Really twitchy gameplay as well. Probably want to avoid it if you're a Dundad. Survival Hunter, probably more towards the bottom. I think that it's got quite a bit of keybinds, a lot of tactical play and strategy that you got to have involved with it. So it's not just going to run around smash type of melee DPS. So maybe want to avoid it. Unholy DK, because of the tuning, you want to avoid this for sure. It's very weak at the moment, but it's also got a lot of maintenance and ranged kick, lots of ways to disrupt casts, although you can go immune to damage. As far as Dundad specs, maybe it's not like, I want to put it on D tier, but I think it's not as complicated as Feral Rogue. So we'll leave it on C tier, mostly because of tuning. I think if its tuning was better, it was stronger, I'd probably put it on B tier, but the tuning's holding it down. Vengeance, we're just slapping the tank specs up here. Windwalker Monk, moderate amount of keybinds. Not really straightforward with like the hit combo, trying to use a different ability every time that you press something. Maybe it's not really as spammy though. You got some channeled abilities that lets your wrist relax a little bit. It's probably like middle of the pack here with enhancement. Augmentation Evoker, honestly, like it's probably similar to Devastation, but you got more team utility. So I think having to like keep Obsidian Scales, be more aware of your team, makes it a little bit more higher level of awareness, but it's basically the same kit. Also, I think with Evoker, the ranged interrupt being physical means you can ignore mechanics like grounding totem. So even if you're like sloppy with your interrupts, you're still going to land them through a lot of the effects that would immune other interrupts. So Augmentation Evoker, I'll leave it here on A. I don't think it's like insanely hard to play though. But I definitely think Devastation is a little bit easier. Feels weird not putting Fury on S tier. I think it's mostly just the spamminess of it. Enhanced Shaman also feels a bit weird. It depends on the build, right? Like if you're playing Stormbringer, I think it's A tier. And if you're playing Totemic, it's probably C tier. So kind of take that into account, take that into consideration. But I think this is it for the tier list. We're considering like keybind density. We're considering like what's required to like win a game. We're considered spamminess, like how much is your risk going to hurt? How much are you going to have to switch targets and be aware to multiple targets kind of deal. I feel like this is kind of where I would go. If you're a complete Dundad, I'd recommend you one of these four, probably leading down onto this as like we continue down the chain. In terms of just, you just want to log on, not spend a huge amount of time spending time on macros and keybinds and stuff like that, you'll probably be able to give it a good go. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list, kind of more of a fun one, more specialized one. So if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.